Every country has a blueprint for its future, right? And we usually think about things like the economy or big infrastructure projects, but what if the most important part of that blueprint is actually about survival? Today, we're looking at what happens when that blueprint is put to the ultimate test.
So, when a disaster like a massive earthquake hits the news, it's so easy to just see it as a random tragedy, an act of God, totally unpredictable. But is it really?
Or could it be something more, like a test? A really brutal, real-world test of a country's foresight, its priorities, and the plans it laid down years, even decades ago. So that's what we're digging into today. We're looking at Turkey's devastating 2023 earthquake, not just as a random event, but as a test of its national blueprint.
All right, so let's get right into it. A test of the system. How did it actually hold up when everything was on the line? So that quake on February 6, 2023, it was way more than just the ground shaking. It was, tragically, a complete expose. It just ripped open this huge gap between the plans written down in some government office and the reality of what was built on the ground. A fatal gap.
Okay, so to really get our heads around that gap, we've got to first understand what a good blueprint is even supposed to look like. Like, what's the goal here? What's the gold standard? All right, so the big idea here, the term you'll hear, is integrated disaster management. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful, but the concept is actually pretty straightforward. Think of it like a circle, a continuous cycle. You're not just sitting around waiting for something bad to happen. You're actively trying to prevent it, to lessen the impact if it does happen, to be ready to respond, and then to recover in a smart way. It's the whole shebang, a full 360-degree view.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it boils down to a fundamental choice. Are you going to be reactive, where you're mostly just focused on cleaning up the mess after the tragedy? Or do you go for an integrated approach, where the real work is done before the ground even starts to shake, building stronger, more resilient communities from the get-go? One is all about damage control. The other is about prevention.
So how has this actually played out in Turkey? Well, if we look at their own planning documents, we can see a really clear pattern, and it's a pattern often shaped by tragedy. Check out this timeline. This right here is a massive turning point. Between their 7th and 8th national plans, something catastrophic happened, the 1999 Marmara earthquake. And this thing wasn't just another disaster. It was a seismic shock to the system, a wake-up call that you just couldn't ignore.
And get this, in the entire national plan before that 1999 disaster, the word earthquake shows up just 5 times. 5. In a country that sits on some of the world's most active fault lines.
And then, boom. This just says it all. After the tragedy, in the very next plan, that number just explodes, from 5 all the way up to 61. The threat hadn't changed, but man, the attention to it sure did. So what's the big takeaway here? The data tells a really clear story. These big policy shifts weren't happening because of smart, proactive planning. Nope, they were happening in reaction to catastrophe. It's a textbook case of learning the hard way, after the fact. But here's the thing. Even when the plans finally started to change on paper, it just exposed a much deeper issue. This huge disconnect between the words and the reality. It's what researchers call the planning practice gap.
And this quote from the research just nails it. It says that even with all the new talk about disasters and the plans, the fundamental mindset didn't really change. It was still all about disaster response. What do we do after everything's already collapsed? It wasn't that systematic, integrated approach we talked about.
And when you dig into the research, it pinpoints the exact reasons why this blueprint kept failing in the real world. And we're not talking about simple mistakes here. These are deep, systemic problems. You've got a lack of coordination between different government agencies, classic bureaucracy. You've got weak strategies for actually reducing risk, which usually means there's no political will to enforce tough building codes. And then you have the biggest one, just plain old difficulty putting the plan into action, because a perfect plan means nothing if it just sits on a shelf.
So all of this long history of reacting instead of preparing, of plans not matching reality, it all leads us right up to 2023. And what we see is a heartbreaking cycle that just keeps repeating.
And would you look at this? It's the same pattern all over again, but even more dramatic. The plan they had right before the 2023 earthquake, it mentioned disasters 71 times. And the new one, written right after, that number shot up to 270. It is the exact same reactive jump we saw back in '99, just on a bigger scale.
So you see, the 2023 earthquake wasn't some new, unforeseen failure. It was a tragic, horrifying confirmation of a problem that experts have been pointing to for years and years. That planning practice gap stopped being a theory on a page and became a devastating reality with consequences that were just heartbreakingly real.
Which leaves us with this one final, really critical question. And it's not just a question for Turkey, it's for any country, any community that faces these kinds of predictable threats. How do you make sure your blueprint for safety isn't just a document that gets written, but something that actually gets built?